All right, welcome back to another episode of the Supply Chaney podcast. I am your host, Nathan Chaney, and today we are speaking with Conrad, the founder and CEO at Conduit, which is on a mission to improve dock and yard speed, safety, and security. I am a big fan of alliteration, so I'm really glad we're going to have Conrad on today. Let's talk about docks and warehouses. So, Conrad, without further ado, tell us a little bit more about you and what you're all about.
Thanks, Nathan. Appreciate you having me on the show today. Been a long time coming and a huge fan. So, yeah, I've been working on Conduit for 2.5 years now. And it all started with this idea that there are so many tools that are done on the warehouse dock and in the yard that are relegated to spreadsheets, sticky notes, whiteboards sometimes, and radios. Whether that's just basics like dock scheduling or driver check-in, or more complicated things like driver's license verification, forklift operator dispatching, or CT-PAT checklist for trailers. We're building that all into one really easy to use and intuitive platform.
Awesome, awesome. When you put it that way, you kind of list out all the different features and functions that it provides. What I kind of think of like at a high level is we kind of like have these big ERP systems that we're supposed to be able to do everything, and then I feel like we entered this era of specialization and everyone creating like very one-off solutions. And now it feels like everyone like got really separated and really siloed with all their solutions, and now there's like this movement toward aggregating everything back into one sort of one-stop shop solutions. Are you kind of trying to
You
key in
you took the
on that?
words out of my mouth. You nailed it. That is our whole thesis. You can go find a point solution for just taking photos of your freight. You can find a point solution just for scheduling your trucks. But the challenge is if you're an IT leader, it's going to be your worst nightmare trying to integrate like 10 different tools on your loading dock that are all smaller and less critical than your WMS or your TMS. So for us, it's an IT leader's dream to have one vendor managing multiple of these problems or workflows. And yeah, it's essentially plug and play once you do a basic integration.
I didn't realize that there's like IT speak for that. So it's called a point solution. Can you like define that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think of a point solution as responsible for managing just one task, like photo taking, for example, or just a tool for creating forms for trailer inspections.
Gotcha, gotcha. And from your perspective, like the way you're going about this, are you kind of creating those features and those functions like from scratch, or are you kind of collaborating and partnering with folks that do those things and bringing in like their code and IP in order to have that capability?
Good question. Right now, we build everything in house from scratch. I mean, we use some open source stuff like most software companies do, but we're not like integrating someone else's form builder, for example, or someone else's calendar into our tool. Over time, software has gotten much, much easier to build, and more so than ever, that's the case, especially with AI. Not that AI is coding all of our platform or anything like that. But with this trend continuing and software becoming easier and easier to build, there is more value and higher quality software that can be built into one package. So more so than any other time in history, I feel like this is the right time to be building a company like Conduit.
I see. I see. There's something unique about what I'm trying to do with the podcast, and that is not purely stick to the zeros and ones and the nitty gritty details of what our guests do from day to day to day. I want to kind of dig back in the past, pull out the family photo album a little bit, and kind of understand your backstory. Like, where'd you come from? Where'd you grow up? Like, what was in your mind when you were growing up, and did you ever think you're going to be stepping into warehouses so much when you grew up?
Such a good question. And yeah, I was reading about this in preparation for it. And it's kind of funny to think back that my very first job was counting PVC pipe in my family's home service business. Like literally, second floor was the warehouse. There was bins for every different shape and style of fitting and pipe, and I had a clipboard where I was doing counts. And at the end of the day, my job was to turn in an accurate sheet, and so my dad could do inventory. um, that was a like really hot, stuffy warehouse in the summer, but I can't say that's my full inspiration for coming here, but certainly gave me a lot of respect for all of the innovation that has come since doing very basic counts back in the day. What really got me into the space was my first job out of school. I worked at Convoy, the trucking startup that, famously went out of business maybe like a year and a half ago. But I didn't realize it at the time, the amount of appreciation that I would have for the space in the job interview process. Their hook is everything you see around here got here on a truck. And you just don't appreciate that until you actually hear those words, and then you start seeing those drivers going down the road. You start doing dock and yard walks, warehouse walks. But yeah, Convoy was my first real foray into supply chain. Spent 5.5 years there. That was in Seattle, where I was born and raised. And then 5.5 years into that, left to start Conduit. And now I'm happily living in San Francisco with my wife.
I'm gonna try to let's see. Something doesn't fit in that story you just told because you said something about in your youth, hot, sweaty, stuffy warehouse and Seattle. I feel like those two don't go in the same sentence. Was that family business? Was that growing up years in Seattle or somewhere else?
So, believe it or not, Seattle has some of the best summers in the world, in my humble opinion. And yeah, it gets hot, especially in a warehouse with no windows.
I recall in the Seattle Portland area, it was probably a few years ago that there was like some heat dome that came in. I mean, and like the whole nation, down here in Texas, we all got like air conditioners like in every room because it's deadly hot down
Yeah,
here. But there it was like we learned that like 70% of the population don't have ACs at all, and it was crazy that it was hitting like 90 or 95 degrees, which today is just like an average summer day in Texas.
yeah, exactly.
So anyway, so when you say like a hot stuffy warehouse, for me, I'm like, if it wasn't like below, this particular line of latitude, I don't know if you could say that. But can you talk a little bit more about like those formational, like foundational years growing up? Were you into sports, or were you like a bookworm, or like who was Conrad the kid?
Yeah, Conrad the Kid was very much an adventurer. Did a little bit of team sports, played soccer, baseball, basketball, but what really made me tick was being in the mountains or being on the water. So yeah, mountain biking, skiing, backpacking, all things I love doing with my family growing up. Um, and that translated into going to school in Utah. At the time, my mind was set on being like, I wanted to be the best skier in the world or like a professional mountain biker or something. And Utah was an amazing place for that because there's so much great skiing around and mountain biking in southern Utah. But once I got to Utah, there was this incredible program called University Venture Fund that allowed students to participate in like venture capital style due diligence and write small checks into these great companies. Like we wrote a check into Spotify, we wrote a check into Lyft, and it like totally opened my eyes up to the world of startups and technology in general. Like growing up, it was very much at the dinner table talking about the family business. That's what my mom and dad would talk about constantly. uh, Getting to college was pretty eye-opening in all the different ways you can found a business, start a business, scale a business, whether it's technology, services, hardware. And I actually think that was maybe the most formative experience in eventually developing into who I am today, the founder of Conduit.
Yeah, I'm seeing here that like you're from school perspective, I'm seeing BS in finance and computer science, which does seem like an optimal combination for starting up something in the kind of software tech space and being an entrepreneur in that space because of the finance component. So it
Yeah.
seems like you kind of put yourself on a path to this early on.
I just like building things. Frankly, I'm not a software engineer. I won't pretend to be one. But I love looking at data. I love talking to customers, figuring out what their problems are. And I would attribute that to most of our success at Conduit and like learning. And it's a culture our whole team has, like learning about that next set of problems, turning that into a product that can be used across multiple customers. It's just like a building mindset that me and then the rest of the team have.
I see. Let's kind of talk through kind of where maybe in that middle section of the episode here, kind of your resume, almost like as if I was interviewing for a job. Can you kind of talk a little bit about maybe your time and like what you did at Convoy, or any other sort of career stops you've made?
Sure. Convoy was great because my goal was to become a product manager. And in an early stage startup, people are usually joining in roles that, maybe the job title isn't exactly what they wanted, or the organization isn't exactly the org they wanted to be in. So I joined Convoy with the intention of going into a product management path. But I'm really grateful for where I started because it gave me direct communication with truck drivers and with warehouses about their like day-to-day problems. So I did like, a 5 a.m. to 2 p.m. shift, and, a shift that ended 8 or 9 p.m., where my whole job was just getting ETAs from truckers. It was like, hey, where are you? Are you going to be in Houston soon? And I actually don't speak very much Spanish at all, but I became the Spanish expert. It was like, a qué hora vas a llegar a Houston? And I could just interpret the hour back, and then I'd put that in the system.
Good to see you were putting that college degree to good use there, updating ETAs.
Absolutely, right. But how else would I understand the challenges of a poorly scheduled appointment, or maybe showing up without an appointment, or the wrong PO number, if I didn't actually understand what these drivers are going through, and coaching them through these problems. So I spent about a year and a half or 2 years doing that, and then moved over to the product management organization, where my entire job was figuring out how we as an organization can book the best set of appointments for a given transit. So cutting out idle time, allowing enough time for hours of service resets, of course, things like restroom breaks, filling up gas stations, all went into our algorithms. And then actually being able to secure those points. So booking them as a pair. One of the biggest challenges for anyone who's doing appointment scheduling today will know that you can get your ideal time at point A, but point B might not have something until the day after the day you want, and then you just added in so many wasted hours and taking capacity out of our network. So yeah, just built technology around that, and the insight, or it's pretty obvious to anyone who works in the space, is about a third of the warehouses out there are actually using some sort of digital interface. The other 2/3 are using like phone and email. So I dedicated a lot of my time trying to figure out how we can get these phone and email style warehouses using something that's a little bit easier for third parties to interact with, like rather than picking up the phone or writing an email. So worked on Convoy's transportation management system for a little bit, and then ultimately I had quite a few customers that were working with me on different initiatives around appointment scheduling automation, and they were actually some of the ones that really gave me the confidence and were early partners at Conduit. It gave me the confidence to go out and start Conduit, quite frankly.
Awesome, awesome. I'm working on my MBA, and I took an entrepreneurship class last semester. I'm almost done with it, and one of the like sort of chapters was like, where do founders and entrepreneurs get their ideas and inspirations for their companies and their solutions? And I want to say like the one of the biggest slices of that pie was from their current job, from the current work that they do on a day-to-day basis, because you live it and you breathe it and you see these opportunities and gaps, and then you take that as inspiration and kind of run with your idea of how to solve it. And it sounds
Yeah,
like you kind of fall into that slice of the pie.
absolutely. Like, it is very specific knowledge that I think unlocks these opportunities. I would argue, unless there's a massive technological change, the low hanging fruit has already been picked. Like, I can't go start the next online dog walking service. It would be very hard to be differentiated. Um, with the popularization and general acceptance of AI, I think that's totally changing. Like, there's so much low hanging fruit out there to go and chase. But yeah, for me, it was like, how else would I find out about these really nuanced problems if I wasn't already working in the space? It'd be very hard to.
Right, right. Um, so you have sort of the position of being the first, maybe only Y Combinator sort of competitor or I don't know what the right word is, participant that has been on the podcast. So could you kind of talk through? I'm sure a number of people have seen it, watched the YouTube videos like I did about it, but could you kind of share like what that experience is like?
Sure. For those who don't know, Y Combinator is a startup incubation program. They invest in a few hundred startups a year, and their magic sauce is helping these very early stage founders who could be 10 years out of undergrad, maybe have never gone to undergrad or fresh out of school, hone in on identifying the problems that they could actually build a business around. It's much easier said than done, but they are the masters of helping folks pivot to find problems that are actually that people are willing to pay for to have solved. And my time at Y Combinator was awesome. It was so transformative in terms of how we approach building and how we approach problem discovery. The funny thing is it's all rather intuitive advice that maybe entrepreneurs just don't want to hear. Like, how the heck am I going to go get my first sale? I've never done sales before. They're going to tell you, go make 500 cold calls and then come back to me and tell me what you learned. Just like do the hard work and you'll either be successful, learn you hate what you're doing, or learn something really, really valuable that's going to help you find something else that's really valuable.
I think I heard or read a statistic that folks that go into YC like 40% pivot or something like that. Were you in that group, and is that statistic right? Do you know?
I don't know the exact statistic, but it sounds right. I was shocked that halfway through the program, there's still a very large percentage of people pivoting. But that's just the nature of startups. Like last week, Airbnb came out with a massive thing that they're now doing like home services type stuff or like haircuts and I'm not exactly sure. It is like home services or beauty services, but that would be like a pivot of a company that's been around for a decade. They're still going to do their core business, but I think any entrepreneur I think has realized that like there's always some amount of pivoting going on in your business, whether it's like doing in-person events if it's Nathan Chaney Social Club or just sticking to podcasting. But for us, we actually stayed pretty true to our initial problem statement and solution the whole time. Frankly, it was a little bit nerve wracking. It made us self conscious because all of our former batchmates were pivoting. But we just kept getting signals that there's more and more problems to solve in this space. So maybe the real pivot was we started off just being like a pure play scheduling and check-in tool. But our business model evolved to becoming multi-product, being modular and flexible to fit in a bunch of different warehouse environments. And so maybe that was the pivot that we went through to become what we are today.
It sounds to me like what you discovered through that YC process is that customers weren't looking for another point solution for scheduling for docs.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like there's still a very large percentage of warehouses out there that are using pen and paper. However, our insight really just came from customer conversations where they're asking us to add on additional functionality that still couples really well with dock and yard management. So I attribute all of our pivoting to customer conversations and spending time with them.
So one of the questions that I like to try to ask all of our guests, and this is kind of like before we start moving into the nuts and bolts and zeros and ones of things, is kind of looking back at your experience in school and going through kind of business school and computer science major and all this sort of stuff, and then like where you are today. What kind of advice would you give to students that kind of look at what you've done, what you're doing, and say, I want to go be like Conrad one day? Any words of advice for them?
Um, your situation matters a lot. So take this with a grain of salt. But if you have even just a little bit of savings in the bank, the risk of quitting your job and starting your own business is much less than I made it out to be in my head. I think the people that want to start their own business are highly employable people. Sometimes they make the best employees. Sometimes they can also make the worst employees. However, I think you can always go get another job, especially if you're ambitious enough to start your own, to create your own job. So that's a piece of advice I'd give to anyone.
Fully agree. The interesting thing for me is I put 10 or 15 years into working before jumping out on my own. And I've, through that, I always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, knew I wanted to do my own thing. But I never felt like I quite had the business, like what I wanted to do
Yeah.
with the, I have 1,000 ideas. Which ones do I go and pursue? And then the other part was, I think from like a finance perspective, I was able to get to a state of having enough savings, as you're talking about, and having enough things paid off and all that sort of stuff, that I was able to go and not worry about the fact that I may not make much money or any money for a while, and be
Hmm.
okay with that. Right. I think that, to your point, that's a really big weight off your shoulders when you know you've got some runway to work with. Can you talk about like finances a little bit as a startup? Like, are you going down the investor path and all that sort of stuff? Can you talk about that component?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, with Y Combinator, when you join, you get $500,000 for a percentage of your company. And then at the end of the program, it's called Demo Day. And Demo Day is where Y Combinator brings together like 500 to 1,000 different investors. And, sometimes it's live, sometimes it's over Zoom. And you pitch to try and raise money. And it's a really cool, chaotic environment where, there's definitely the hottest startup in the room type of uh, mentality where they're getting the most money and stuff like that. It's kind of like a giant auction, not really, but so we raised a round coming out of that, and we've been able to ride that for quite some time. And now really proud to say that we're on like very sure financial footing, but nothing too much to disclose as of right now.
Excellent. Well, that's awesome. That's awesome. And just the logistics, because I've only flirted with the idea, but just the logistics of keeping up with shares and equity and who does what, and I think there's even like software, like to help keep track of all that. I suppose, right? Like, there's
Yeah,
a solution for everything now.
there is. However, if you don't go exactly by the book, then you generally need to rely upon your legal counsel, and I think it's worth paying a little bit extra for a great lawyer.
Gotcha. Another question, again, before we kind of maybe go into a little bit more deep dive into Conduit. Do you have a favorite like quote or book that you kind of a quote that you live by, or a book that you recommend for everyone?
The quote that I reflect upon often, especially when I'm feeling down, is the Theodore Roosevelt quote about the man in the arena, where it is not the people sitting on the sidelines who are critiquing you that count. It is the people that have experienced the highs and lows of just making an effort, that that they are the ones who have the scars to prove that they have tried, even if they have failed.
I see. I see. So you're not a fan of backseat drivers and that sort of thing.
It's when you go out and you post on your LinkedIn, I'm starting a company, you're exposed to everyone's thoughts and opinions, whether valid or not. And as soon as you start selling, you get told no, 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 like a million times over. And you have to create tough skin and have confidence in what you're doing and in your vision and in your team. Otherwise, you know, it'll be very hard to keep going. But, to me, it is, I have to remind myself that like I am doing this because I know I can do it. And it is not the critic behind me that dictates my success. It is my efforts and my team's success.
So, any more thoughts like on entrepreneurship, leadership, kind of building a company before we kind of go into like the nuts and bolts of warehouse and dock management?
I think you can never be too early to go into market. Try to get someone to pay for whatever you're doing as soon as you can. That is the ultimate signal of if you're building something that people want.
I like it. I like it. We might need to talk a little more offline about that one. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about Conduit. Can you talk a little bit about the idea behind the name, and maybe again a little bit more on your inspiration for starting it? I know that we already talked that you realized you didn't want to do a point solution, but can you kind of talk us through those early days, those first days of putting action behind this idea?
Yeah. Yeah, the name came from, frankly, a lot of just milling about my living room, trying to figure out what resonated with what we're trying to solve. And conduit is, there's a bunch of different definitions for it, but the thing that people most frequently relate to is just like tubing that connects different systems in your house. For us, we're like in that position of a loading dock in a warehouse, that border in the exchange of merchandise between carrier and warehouse. Like, we are the conduit between those two systems. We're coordinating the comings and goings, we're coordinating the checklists. So it actually just resonated really well, and I love it.
Well, you also mentioned that you were counting PVC pipe and whatnot growing up. So, I mean, you could almost even take it back that
Maybe deep
far,
in my subconscious.
way back there, right? Yeah, yeah. It's still ingrained in your mind,
Yeah.
those inventory checklists. So, can you talk a little bit about how users interact and work with your application, with your system?
Yeah. So think of a shipping and receiving clerk, like sitting in an office, and a forklift operator and a guard shack. Sometimes those people are using radios and spreadsheets. Within Conduit, they have one pane of glass where they can communicate and coordinate their activities, not only amongst themselves for the processing of trucks and loading and unloading, but also with customer service teams sitting back home in the corporate office, with transportation teams that are trying to understand the performance of their carriers, but also with the carriers themselves who are needing to book appointments, to check in for appointments, to do things like driver's license scanning. So everything is hosted on the cloud. It's a SaaS application, and people can log in not only on their desktop, but also on tablets, Zebra guns, iPhones, you name it, so that they can do it while walking around the floor or while backing their truck into the door.
What is your ICP? What's your ideal customer like?
We sell best to multi-location third-party logistics warehouses that are doing a lot of full truckload. That could be refrigerated, could be dry van, container, um, could even be things as specialized as pharmaceuticals. We have a lot of great pharmaceutical customers that have benefited from like pretty robust checklists and better compliance.
From a pricing model, are you kind of like a SaaS model, or do you follow something different?
Yeah, so we do annual subscriptions, either 1 year or 3 year. And the best part about what we do, you can go find point solutions for all of these things that we do, but you can start with just one module at Conduit. And then with a click of a button, they can upgrade over time to solve additional problems for their business without having to go out into the market and find new vendors. Just one easy to use platform.
And so once a customer kind of decides to come on board and say like, hey, this is the solution we need, what kind of happens there? What's the onboarding process like from that point?
Yeah, so each customer gets a dedicated onboarding point of contact, and we'll create a plan with them. We can move at their pace. What you will find is we have no problem getting a customer up and running next day or same day. However, to ensure the customer's success, we like building out a week-long plan with training and go live planning all into one easy-to-use document that they can rally their team around and get alignment internally.
From like a back end sort of perspective, where are you at, do you think, on the journey of building out all the features and functions and sort of hooks that you want to incorporate? Like, do you think you're 50%? Are you 100% baked? You done? Like, or what's kind of the roadmap look like?
Um, we have 1 million square foot warehouses using us for hundreds of trucks per day for everything from scheduling to check in, driver's license verification, like all the things we've talked about. But I bet we're only about 10% of the way done with building. So we have a great product. We have never lost a customer. Customers continually expand with us. But there is so much more value we can add to this space between WMS and TMS that we're just going to keep building and keep solving customer problems.
Could you talk a little bit about, I think today there's such a proliferation of data and IoT and AI and all this sort of stuff. I don't believe I've heard the letters AI come out of your mouth yet so far. So I've got to ask, like, what your viewpoint on that is. Is it in your sort of roadmap for what y'all are working on, or what?
Yes. We try to tread lightly around that 2 letter acronym because it's loaded with so much junk out in the marketplace. Like, it is very easy to slap AI on just about everything, but can you deliver results for your customers is the key question we ask ourselves anytime we think that a specific problem could be solved with AI. So from a product development philosophy, We're here to solve customer problems. We're not here to build AI products. If the solution can be best solved by AI, we will use it. If it can't, we'll use more traditional methods of building software to ensure our customers are successful.
I like the honest answer because a lot of times people are like, oh yeah, we got AI in there, it's totally awesome, and does everything.
Yeah,
uh, so appreciate the transparency there.
like tomorrow we could add an AI chatbot, but what value is it going to add to our customers? We want to embed AI strategically into high value workflows, whether that's document capture, email automation, things that are really painful for a human to do day in and day out. But it's about sequencing those things and making sure you have a great system of record to integrate it into. Otherwise, what data is the AI going to use to make decisions?
Maybe as we kind of wrap up here, could you share like a recent success story or use case that listeners could kind of like imagine kind of what it would be like, kind of seeing the story from someone else's perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll share two quick stories. First one, we had a customer that was struggling with just the basics of seal verification. Like, are outbound trucks getting a seal put on them 100% of the time? Or is it more like 90% of the time and it's opening them up to some risk? Um, they were looking at hiring 24/7 guards for these 24/7 facilities to do that manual inspection because they didn't want their clerks walking out into the middle of the Ohio winter to check one-on-one with a driver if the seal's intact and seal's secured. So we built a touchless seal verification workflow as part of our dock and yard management tool, and it allows drivers to apply the seal, take a photo of it right on the Conduit site, send it to the shipping and receiving office, and then the shipping and receiving office can compare it just like TSA does with your passport in your face, but with the BOL and the seal number that's in the photo. That's been really successful. They have about 100% compliance. They have 100% compliance because it is a mandatory step in this workflow. And we solve the edge cases when drivers aren't able to take a high quality photo. So that's avoided, that's kept them from having to hire guards at every single site they have. Um, Another case that's been successful, that's like a little bit more, call it plug and play. We had a customer switch over from an existing vendor because they saw the value in the Conduit platform. And we try to make switching super, super easy and super fast while retaining all of your historical data. So they were able to just do a data download and upload it into our tool, and all of their orders shifted over seamlessly, no data loss, and all of their carriers got instant notification that, hey, here's your order. You're supposed to arrive on this time and this date. And that's allowed us to make that switching cost, if you are using like a bolt-on to your TMS or your WMS for doc management, as easy as it possibly can be.
Very nice. Very nice. I appreciate you coming on today, and we've talked about so many different topics, but I'm pretty sure that we maybe didn't get everything out that you wanted to. Is there kind of any stone that we did not turn over here that you'd kind of like want to make sure to leave people with before we wrap up for today?
I think this is very much a selfish plug. That's why I'm on a podcast. Just kidding. The thing is, there's so much new technology coming into supply chain, and it's very hard to know what's real and what's fake. My recommendation to anyone, and I think Conduit does an exceptional job of this, is going out and talking to users of the tool. The folks that have been there forever aren't necessarily always going to be the best. Sometimes it's worth looking at newer solutions and newer vendors in the space. So my recommendation is compare apples to apples using user reviews, testimonials, things that show real people using the tool. Sometimes it's worth giving that newer startup a shot.
Awesome. Well, you make a compelling case. So if I was running a warehouse or something, I suppose I would give you a shot. Um, well, hey, thanks also, Conrad, just in general for all the support you've provided for the Supply Chain Social Club and all the different things we've done. Hopefully, we've given some value to you. And so thanks for the support there. And I will see you at I guess, in New Orleans here pretty soon for the work conference.
Can't wait. Proud to be a supporter.
All right.
Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Conrad as much as I did. The few main takeaways for me are the inspiration and understanding for Conduit came from opportunities for improvement that he saw in the yard and dock space, not just when he was a child working in his parents' warehouse, counting inventory for pipes and things with a clipboard and pen, but also as a product manager at Convoy. And we talked about how the inspiration for so many businesses these days comes from the work that people do day to day and the realization of opportunities that they see in that space. He also shared his experience about going through Y Combinator, who I think he's my first podcast guest that has gone through that program. So to me, I've always looked at that as like a boot camp for tech startup companies, and it's super difficult to get into and it's grueling to go through, but you come out better on the other side of it. So the fact that he was able to go through that and not pivot with his idea of Conduit, but rather come out the other end realizing that he's got kind of a good idea on his hands was really awesome. And maybe a little bit more to that point, I also thought it was interesting how we got to talk a little bit about point solutions and kind of one-off applications and apps out there that do just one particular function, and how there's this movement toward having comprehensive and modular solutions and making sure that those play nice with other systems like TMSs and WMSs and such, and how he kind of saw that that was the way to go forward with building Conduit and putting a great solution out there for customers. So thanks for tuning in. And until the next episode, be safe and have fun out there.